All right, then greetings and welcome everyone to the Art and Science of Awareness. Now, this is the series in which we interview scientists, researchers, and thought leaders working in the field of mindfulness. I'm John Roberts from Living Well Community, your home for interactive and on-demand wellness programming created and curated for you by Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare and Tufts Health Plan. Now, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon by Tara Healy, Jeffrey Proulx. So let me say a few words about Jeff. Jeff is an assistant professor at Brown University, where he works with the Mindfulness Center and holds faculty positions in psychiatry and human behavior, Indigenous studies, public health, and contemplative studies as well. Jeff's research is dedicated to applying mindful practices in diverse communities, including Indigenous and Black communities, high-risk adolescent populations, as well as with police officers, first responders, and others. His primary focus revolves around utilizing mindfulness to mitigate the impact of stress and life events on both physical and mental health. Looking really forward to this conversation. Now, folks, we want you to be a part of it as well, though, so please do open up the chat. Now, let us know your thoughts and questions as they arise at any point during today's program. We'll save time at the end to address them. In the meantime, welcome to you, Tara. Welcome to you, Jeff. Good to have you both here.
And thanks again, Jeff, for your willingness to join this conversation today and to be part of this series. And really excited to just kind of jump right in. And so I'm going to start with a question that I have been asking all of our guests each month, which is, I think, contextually helpful. And so if you could give us a little bit of your own background related to mindfulness, what drew you to this practice? And then we'll talk more about the professional piece. But what drew you to mindfulness? Where did that curiosity start?
Well, when I was young, late teens, I had been had gotten some experience with mindfulness and practice and some contemplative traditions and like Buddhism and such. But really, I was and so I was interested in it, and I liked some of the concepts that were being taught a lot. But really, what drew me to it, though, was I was also very much involved with the effort to reduce the likelihood of nuclear weapons destruction and the production and testing of nuclear weapons. And so I was oftentimes at these different places where they would make weapons or test them. And there was always a contingent of people from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and specifically these Buddhist monks that would come. And oftentimes it was interesting because there would be this huge a lot of tension and aggression and anger a lot of times between people that wanted to make the weapons and people that wanted to stop it, and it would be just incredible. But what I always noticed is that there would be these monks sitting over on the side, and their contribution to this was they would be sitting in zazen, I guess, or whatever practice they were doing, and just beating on this drum. And I just remember the energy, the compassion, the wellness that was always being just exhibited by them doing nothing, right? By just being present and in that state. And that's what really drew me in, because in the midst of all this cacophony of and chaos and heat, and there would be this person sitting in the center of it that was just exhibiting perfect peace and presence. And that's really what drew me were those people and how they were. And especially because I was very much interested in for lack of better words, trying to create a better world, and wanting to contribute to that. And to me, the aggression, the violence, the assertiveness, all of that just didn't seem to be getting anybody anywhere. But the sense of being able to be stillness and in peace was the most moving thing that I saw. And that's what really drew me in, was that.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. And it sounds like you kind of already had an early interest just naturally, the way you're wired, that it was already there. And to see that kind of balance and equanimity in the monks, um, it was inspiring to you, and especially amidst the degree of tension with, as you say, some people for, some people against violence, and yet here was this example of a different way to be. Yeah,
Yeah.
really. Yeah.
And I had been, and as an activist, and I was a peacekeeper, I guess was my designation, oftentimes trying to figure out how do you reduce these tensions and how can we be more productive and creative and loving and compassionate, all the time. our goal was is that our efforts were meant to be compassionate to all people, right? And not just to a certain group of people, you know, and it's difficult to bring that that love and compassion sometimes when people are being violent and aggressive to each other. And so, and those
Right.
are the times that I think that we encourage people to be, and this is, you know, this is taught by many great people before, you know, be peaceful and nonviolent in these moments. But to think about that and to express that was really different. I think how these people were doing that and the expression of it. And that's what I wanted to do, is be in the doing, non-doing.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. I mean, like you said earlier, to somehow impact change in this world, in the world, and that felt like that was a door in that really deeply spoke to you. Beautiful. Yeah, really awesome. So, in introducing you, John talked about the various populations that you work with. And it would be really interesting to hear more about that work in general and what you're learning about how stress can mitigate the impact, or how mindfulness can mitigate the impact of stress and life events on, I think the populations mainly were Indigenous, Black, high risk adolescent, high risk youth, first responders.
Yeah, so background on me is that I've mixed background. But a lot of Indigenous Mohawk from Six Nations in Canada. So that's been, you know, my father's side of the family, and so I spent a lot of time with those people. And but also my mother eventually remarried a Black man in the 70s, and so grew up in his uh, urban Black male and his culture. And so over time, what I started to realize is that there were a lot of different disparities on how people's health outcomes, wellness outcomes, economic outcomes, just differences in the wider rest of the community. But I became really focused on health outcomes a lot. And so as I went through graduate school, I'm actually a psychologist by training, but I'm a health psychologist. And so my interest in is, what is the relationship between the mind and body, and how does that affect our health, and vice versa, right? And so um, stress, for example, like how does stress affect our cardiovascular system, or how does that relate to dementia or hypertension or diabetes, any number of these things, which turns out to be very high in these communities that I mentioned. Indigenous communities and Black communities tend to have these higher rates of some of these diseases that as I went through my training in grad school and postdoc, I started to realize a lot of this stuff is associated, stress is associated with these diseases that we're talking about. Either it's not as a creator of the conditions, at least it exacerbates it. And so one of my approaches then was thinking about, if we can reduce stress in these communities, maybe we can reduce some of the effects of dementia, diabetes, hypertension, any number of these different conditions. So that's kind of the step that I wanted to take. How can we look at the psychosocial interventions that could possibly have an effect on these different outcomes? So that's the beginning. Now, the thing was, as I was thinking about these issues and getting more you know, skill sets in public health and around people doing medicine, and starting to apply these things in clinical settings and in the communities, we're starting to learn stuff. But at the same time, I was doing mindfulness separately, right? If that was my own particular thing, because I kept thinking, well, I'm Indigenous, and I don't remember any time. And I was very much focused on bringing in culturally specific care, bringing in care that people can recognize that they that it reflects them and their healing traditions. And I was like, I don't see any cushions and doing mindfulness, and you know, nothing that I was growing up around, like, you know, Three Sisters and corn beans and squash, and thinking about wampum and the traditions of the longhouse, and you know, none of that. It just didn't seem. Anyways, that's kind of how I was thinking, and I kept it separate. And I kept thinking, well, I don't want to introduce this mindfulness, which I'm recognizing and has a huge bunch of science and experience, people saying it affects stress reduction, it can affect health, but it just was separate to me. And then one of the things I started to realize over time, though, is that a lot of the practices and a lot of the things that are culturally specific to some of these traditions are already mindful. right? And so I was starting to think about what's this definition of mindfulness. I go off of John Kabat-Zinn's loose definition of, mindfulness being present in the present moment on purpose without judgment, essentially, right? So what are these things that bring us into that place that we define as being mindful? And I started looking at all these cultural traditions, starting with the indigenous communities, and I'm like, well, dancing, right, is very purposeful and mindful. And when people are doing these specific types of dances, grass dance, or if it's a Eastern blanket dance, I mean, there's very specific things and purposefulness that comes into it, or beading, or different ways of using language and being able to incorporate that. And so I was, from that particular goal of thinking about how do we bring in, from that perspective of increasing culturally specific treatment for people, right? Which I think involves the immersion of culture as a part of that. How can we combine that with this mindfulness stuff? And that's basically where we've been going since then, is being able to say, how can we take these traditions and the ways that people, what are the strengths in these communities and their wellness traditions, and how can we build those into these mindfulness paradigms, right? And so I've been basically working with that. I'm trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR teacher training, and I've taught it for a while. And so I've been using that model to work with different communities by basically saying, okay, here's an MBSR class 1, we're going to have an introduction. There's going to be some meditation. There's going to be a raisin. There's going to be, but so we would take those things, right? And then take each one of those components and say, so what in your community, right, what would the raisin be, right? So like in some indigenous communities, we'll take there'll be an acorn, or it will be a cranberry, or something specific to that particular nation. And we'll focus on that as being the thing. Or we'll look at, I'll say, we'll do breathing meditation. Well, what's the word? A lot of times we'll look at the word for breath in that community. A lot of times that word will have a bigger meaning, like at Paiute, we're working with a word called hoka, and I think at Narragansett it's nashawak. And anyways, so this word is similar to breath, but what it means is it's a connection to the 4 directions and the winds that come from those directions. And there's a whole big story about all of the different healing aspects of the different, when the 4 winds come in, and what you're breathing in, and what the connection to creator is, and what the connection to past relations and ancestors and the earth, and all that comes into that one word. So what we'll do is, instead of just breathing meditation, is we'll do hoka, right? And then be able to introduce some aspects of that language. So the exercise itself becomes an immersion into the cultural aspects that we've asked the elders and the culture holders, what do you want people to learn? Right? We want them to learn about the word hoka, or we'd like them to learn, we'll do body scans. This is one of my favorite ones we created. This is easy to, and we can do this from nation to nation to nation, right? So languages are 400 different languages of indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, at least, right? So in order to specify that, we'll work with that nation. We'll say, what are your words for toe and ankle and shin and knee? And we'll do a body scan where the people are doing the body scan, they're listening to it in language, which is a progressive meditation exercise is focused on, bringing your attention to body parts for about 40 minutes. And it's great. And the exercise is known to help with stress reduction, with better sleep, with reduced pain reported. That has this whole big slew of benefits. But if what we do is then we do it also in the language of that community, right? So when they hear the word toe, they also hear the Paiute word for toe and knee and thigh and stuff. So and they got to do this as an exercise 40 minutes a day, 5 days a week. I usually give it out for 3 weeks in a row. So during all that time, even though they may just be learning the word for toe or knee or whatever, they're learning the language, they're learning the enunciation, that immersion while they're doing the practice. So anyway, so we've been working on all these different creative ways of how can we bring in to hit that place of mindfulness, right? Of being present in the moment without judgment, on purpose. What is it that brings people there? And that's been our whole exploration for years. And it's just been exciting how it's played out. Like in some of the things that I've described, and we've been able to bring in a lot of art and beading and dance. The dance stuff, bringing that into mindful movement has just been super exciting.
Jeff, amazing. I'm like so inspired because, making it culturally recognizable to the groups you're with. Like they can relate to the practices and the languages, and also just early on, your ability to see, well, these cultures are already doing mindfulness. Here are different ways that they're innately already doing it. And then to make the teaching specific. So the relatability is there, the trust is there. It's not a one size fits all. It can't be.
Mm-mm.
And you know, the same in medical care, wanting, and it sounds like even that was even some of the early roots for you, is seeing that medical care was not culturally appropriate for particular groups. It was more a one size fits all medical system. And I know in many ways that that is changing and has changed over the years, but I think to start there for you to see that and then bring it into the cultures, and like you said, mindfulness was sort of separate, right? It was just like a separate thing. And then you're like, wait a minute, and you care about health outcomes.
I get to work with just amazing people, right? So the thing is that I have ideas, but what all of the content and all of the skills and everything, all of the riches is really already existing in these different communities that we're working with. So yeah, I get to work with a lot of different tribal health people, and there's administrators, but then there's all the people that I work with who are on the ground, who are providers and who are seeing patients and who are designing, the behavioral health events and things, so it's just the amount
It's
of
collaborative. Yeah.
collaborative. But what a lot of these people though that I'm working with, these community organizations or indigenous health service groups, are working with just a lot of love but very few resources, relatively. And so I think that that's the wonderful thing about it, is how the magic that these people create is what I want to emphasize.
Yeah, and I think, from what you're saying, it comes from a deep care of other human beings, of seeing our shared humanity. What has been challenging for you in this work? What have you found to be challenging, and how are you working with those challenges?
Well, I mean, any research in the world is always just sort of challenging, to do. It's a lot of work, but I think one of the main things is a lot of perceptions of let's say mindfulness for one,
Yeah.
or of the perceptions of maybe large universities or government entities,
Mm.
coming in and offering to help things, there's always, I think a lot of it is some suspicion of, and people will say, and maybe that's changing, and I've been doing this too long, I think. um but it seemed like early on a lot of people would say, this is a white people thing, and it's just like, it's not really for us, right? This is something that's really marketed and made for other people. And even, I don't even know, to a certain extent, of like health interventions, people, because the communities I work with have been disregarded, ignored, in so many different ways for so long, that people have gotten just I'm not about used to it, but are expect that, right? And don't expect oftentimes to have good relationships with these other things, other institutions. So I think that's been a lot about just being able to um, get rid of any sort of boundaries or borders or conceptions, and just try to be able to encourage people to engage as much as we can and make it their own, and
Yeah.
that's a big thing. But to be honest, it doesn't take very long for people to start to realize, that this could be a really uh, a great movement, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of standing back. I remember when I was young, I mentioned my stepfather, um, that and he was a urban black male, and his brother was a recently had returned from Vietnam, was wounded. Neither one of them had very super jobs or much money or much of anything. It was highly uh, um, a time when there was a lot more division in
Mhm.
society, and so a lot of times these black men felt very put upon and disregarded and set aside from society. But one thing they did do, as I noticed, is every Saturday night they would come together and we would play chess, and there would be food, and there would be just, and we'd be on top of the rooftop, and I got to be invited, and it was just a wonderful time. And one of the things I noticed is in that moment they were like, the rest of my week is incredibly hard, depressing. Living in America is very difficult for being a Black man, but for tonight, with our family, we are going to be in perfect enjoyment. And I sensed it as a sense of rebellion in some ways, of just saying, like, we can express ourselves, we can be perfectly who we are in this moment. And that just was, to me, the most magical time, and just gave me so much just joy in the moment and inspiration moving forward. And I'm like, how can we capture that we're going to do this, we're going to be in joy despite the sometimes seemingly purposeful effort to make our lives miserable, you know, and to do that to our children and to our families. And in these moments, we can do that. So how often can we bring out that spark, you know, that we're going to be in this moment perfectly joyful and satisfied in the moment without judgment. And
Yeah, so it's not just that evening, but how do we develop trust and work with some of the misconceptions and create this, you know, trusting, caring, compassionate environment all the time, or as much as we can.
that people would always know it's there, right? They always know then that whether it's at a group that met at the church, or but they were doing something that they always knew, if they were together and they had each other and they could rely on each other, that coping thing was always there. And I think that and having that comfort in your pocket, knowing all the time you could go to that, I think was
Yeah.
just a wonderful thing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's a trust, there's an acceptance, there's a care that is palpable in those moments. And yeah, that's yeah, beautiful.
And that's what we try to create in our 8-week mindfulness classes, is kind of that. But sometimes we're a teapot while we're doing it, or sometimes, you know, we're just sitting and staring at the wall. Oftentimes it may play out in, so I've been working with teens in Hartford, Connecticut, for a number of years with a group at the University of Connecticut, and a group of mostly Black teens who live in a high gun crime neighborhood, a lot of tension and violence in these neighborhoods. And we've been working for years to develop a lot of different coping. A lot of it was based around social media, which is not my area, but a lot of it was getting down to basic stress reduction. And we had tried for a while to introduce formal mindfulness, and for whatever reason, it wasn't really clicking. I don't know if it's just like, I looked at the transcripts, there's a lot of like, oh, he's looking at me, or he's smiling, or just like teenage, like, but also there's bringing in a lot of people who have possibly traumatic experiences in their background, that closing their eyes to being, and you know, so we want, and so it just, all these different things came into, so the sitting meditation didn't work as well. But one thing I noticed in the transcript was one of the instructors had said, listen to the sound of the bell as it disappears into the room. And everybody, it was so affected by that. All the coaches was like, I just felt this immediate peace, and I was really drawn into it. So something about the sound was the sound meditation. So what we've been
tracking it, just kind of tracking it till you could no longer hear it. Yeah, there's like a bit of respite there.
So what we've been doing is, I took that and it just it sat in my mind for years. And recently we've been working with sound healing, sound bath, a woman in California, and we've been introducing it to those same teens, developing this whole thing around doing sound baths, because mindfulness, being in the present moment without judgment, you know, fully here, and focusing on sound. But then we've also started doing where we do have formal mindfulness sitting, but it's a part of the whole thing. And we're introducing African drumming. We also made a relationship with this group in Africa, who a group of women who make different arts and they've made bracelets and different materials for these kids specifically. So when they up, it's this whole thing, they get to choose their bracelet, and then they're with their community members. They have a support group called the Compass Peace Builders. And they are adults who grew up in that same neighborhood, who 10 years ago were those same kids, and they support them. And so we've been working with them. We're training those peace builders to become sound healer and meditation instructors. And we bought them a bunch.
Again, so much collaboration, right? Bringing all these, I mean, always, like, I think, You know, I'm noticing that we've just got about 5 minutes left, and I know John often likes to pop in and ask a question. And I mean, this is so fascinating. I feel like let's continue the conversation offline. But John, I'm going to turn it over to you to throw out another question or whatever you'd like.
Sort of riffing on what you've been talking about for the past few minutes, another project that I know you've been involved with is teaching mindfulness separately to members of the police department and then members of the Black community, and then bringing those groups together in a retreat setting, which sounds like a fascinating and very complex sort of project. I'm wondering if you can say a bit about that and how it has worked out.
Yeah, so we're working in Flint. I was working with an ex-police officer, retired Lieutenant Richard Gerling in Portland when I was at OHSU, and I was doing mindfulness in the Black community there with some of the churches, and he was doing mindfulness work with police. And at the time in the news, there was a lot of disgruntled relationships between the Black community in Portland. So we just were sitting at a restaurant, said, what if we brought them into a mindfulness setting? Would that be a way of reducing the tension and maybe a way of creating more communication networks that seem to be working now? And that's where it started. So we've been doing this in Flint, Michigan now for a number of years and working to expand it to other communities where we're training so separately, the police officers and the community members go through their own mindfulness classes because they're going to be very different from each other, eventually knowing that the goal is that they're going to meet together. But in the beginning, the first 3 or 4 weeks are all about their own practice. And so Richard has developed a really strong program for first responders and incorporating mindfulness into their way they see the world and how their lives work. And Tremaine Gaither is staff at Washington State University, Black man from North Carolina. He leads the Black community group. And then eventually after those, and then in the last couple of weeks, they start talking about what's it going to be like when they come together with that, getting back to that point. And then they meet as an all-day retreat at the end of that. And also at the meantime, as we're training people from the police and the community members to become teachers of those programs with the idea that so we've got people in the teacher training programs on both ends that eventually that'll be sustainable in that community.
Well, I feel like this is Tara has been continuing to allude to this, and this is I feel this is a piece with so much of your work of taking the universal principles of mindfulness and sort of applying them to the specific conditions of different communities, and then using that work to bring those communities together in conversation. Wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff there. Now, we are getting close, unfortunately, to the closing moments. I do want to drop a couple of links into the chat for folks. Now, this session has been a part of our Living Well community programming, which really includes a wide range of interactive and on-demand classes, not just mindfulness sessions like this one, but also yoga, strength training, Tai Chi, cooking demonstrations, cardio dance, much, much more. These classes are always free and available to all, so you can bring your community while you build your community. The link to explore the current schedule of these sessions is in the chat, and if you are experiencing this already as a recording, it will be in the description or show notes. Jeff, can I ask, if folks are interested in hearing more about your work, where would be a good place for them to go, online or elsewhere?
Well, I don't really have a portal like that. I mean, Facebook, but that's not, you're going to hear about the Buffalo Bills a lot. But you're welcome to, I don't know if my email was made available. People are welcome to reach out to me if they want.
We can also send them to the Brown University Mindfulness Center as well, which
yeah, and I've got papers out there that you can just look up some of that stuff too, just by searching research.
Otherwise, Jeff, do you have any final thoughts, anything you'd like to say?
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been a lovely time and I appreciate it. And like I said, if people do want to know, it's a short time. So if people want to know more, certainly feel free to reach out.
Jeff, thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor. And Tara, thank you for your guidance as always. And thank you folks for your attendance. We will see you all again soon.
Okay.